Welcome to Systems Thinking and the Organisation of Organisations. Why are consultants behind the curve? Didn't know we were, but I'm sure we'll find out.
That's my provocative title, Simon.
This is your provocative title.
Look how many people provoked.
So we provoked a number of people in welcome. Thank you for coming here tonight. And I'd like to express a particular thank you to DAC Beachcroft for their ongoing generosity, and to Kelly in particular for looking after us and supporting us. I'll go through the format and timings. So we have our panel of 3 speakers, and I'll introduce them shortly. The speakers will speak for around 6 minutes each. We'll have their opening comments. Then we'll move to a Q&A, and then you'll get food and drink towards the end and the opportunity to have a wider discussion around that. Just so the speakers know how this is going to work, I will tap twice when they have 2 minutes left. I will tap the glass twice when they have 30 seconds. I will cough politely when time's up, and I will get more polite the longer they overrun. So hopefully they won't. Okay. So this is a joint event between the Worshipful Company of Management Consultants Education Committee, and Benjamin asked me to reinforce that the mission of the Education Committee was educating the profession, as distinct from kind of educating young people in schools. And yes, it's a joint event with the SCiO, which is Systems and Cybernetics and Organisations, of which Patrick is the chair. So with no further ado, I will go on to introduce our 3 speakers. This is Patrick Hoverstadt. Patrick has been a consultant since 1995 with organisations internationally in the private and public sector, mainly on organisational structure, strategy and change. He specialises in using systems approaches for, and is a specialist in working with very large complex organisations, including whole sectors, and has developed methodologies for several different business problems. Benjamin.taylor is the chair of the Worshipful Company of Management Consultants Education Committee, and also Open Events Director of SCiO, and a visiting lecturer in Applied Systems Thinking at Cass Business School in the City of London. He applies systems thinking in his work as a management consultant, and we look forward to hearing about that tonight, and is also the founder of Bed Quadrant. Angus Jenkinson, on my far left, is thinking partner at Stepping Stones. He's an organisation designer and researcher offering methodology for supple coherence and unique value in a complex world. His professional expertise includes technology entrepreneurship, being a full professor of integrated marketing, strategic consulting and photography. He has deep expertise in whole systems, cybernetics, organisational identity, marketing, customer experience and innovation. And he was explaining to me the link between systems and analytical chemistry. You might be able to articulate that more over a glass of wine later. So, thank you very much for that, Angus. Oh, I'm sorry, and I'm Dr. Simon Davey, now the chair for Thank you, Benjamin. I knew I'd forget someone. So the speakers will speak for 6 minutes each, and then we'll open them up. We'll open the floor up to questions. So if you can note your questions down and keep them until after the speakers have spoken. And with no further ado, I would like to ask Patrick to start us off.
Evening all. So I drew the short straw, which is explaining what systems thinking is in 6 minutes and why you should care about it. We don't kind of talk about physics thinking or history thinking, or so why systems thinking? And really the reason is that it does involve a different way of going about thinking. So it's not just thinking about different things, it's not just thinking about a different area, it is actually about thinking in a different way. And that kind of gets distilled down into 2 things for my money. One is a set of systems laws, and one is a set of methodologies. And system laws very rarely get picked up and used, although they are immensely powerful techniques. The methodologies do get used, and so there are a lot of systems methodologies, because systems thinkers are like cats, you know, they all head off in different directions and do their own thing and ignore everybody else. But there are some core ones that get picked up and used quite a lot. So typically, Subsystems Methodology, which is an approach for solving complex problems with multi-stakeholder groups. System Dynamics, which looks at the modelling of dynamic systems, and Ray and I had an argument about this earlier. I would say was the sort of progenitor of the whole sort of climate warming and ecological movement. And the stuff that I tend to specialise in, which is viable systems modelling, which is a way of modelling organisations for either analysis and design. In terms of the thinking, how this is different, the core concept for me in systems, this is a personal view, the core concept for me in systems is this idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This is emergence, which sounds incredibly esoteric. I once did a talk to a dozen professors of systems engineering, and they all to a man said, don't really get this emergence stuff. And it is quite esoteric, but actually incredibly common. So speed in a car, it's a property of the system. It is not a property of any of the components. You take the car apart, none of the components have the property of speed. You put them together in the right way, the car runs and has the property of speed. You take me apart, I no longer have the property of life. I work as a system. I mean, you can take bits of me off and sort of do transplants and blood transfusions and stuff, and they'll carry on quite happily, but I won't. I'd find that quite distressing. So the core idea for me is in systems is emergence, and everything else we do is around that. So we look at wholes because we're interested in the property of wholes, and that sounds again quite sort of hippie-ish, think about the whole thing. It's actually a very disciplined approach. It is a different process for thinking from the analytical process. We think about connections because it's the connections between things that drive emergence. So we think about connections more than we think about the things that are connected. So the emphasis, the focus of what we look at is quite different. And we think about causal loops rather than linear causality. So prior to Macy conferences at the end of just after the Second World War, most science was based on linear models of causality. Most management thinking is based on linear models of causality. Systems thinkers always think about causal loops as a default. We think about linear stuff as well, but as a default we think about loops. And that gives us a very different way of looking at the world. And most of those ideas are embodied in the methodologies, some of them are embodied in the laws. And I think for me the reason why this might be of interest to consultants generally, or consultancy industry generally, is that when you're stuck, when you've got an approach or a generic problem for which the traditional approaches don't work, systems thinking almost always, well, it always gives you an alternative way of looking at this. It may actually give you the answer, it may not, but it always gives you a coherent way of looking at it that gives you an alternative. And we don't like to talk about it in consultancy, and I am a consultant, but a lot of stuff actually doesn't work that well. So if you look at the stats on some classic stuff like doing strategy, it doesn't work most of the time. As Mike Hammer said, the dirty little secret of strategies, actually we don't know how to come up with a competitive strategy that works. Most change doesn't work. Most project management, well, the failure rate of project management now is the failure rate of projects before we introduced project management. So something's going wrong. I'm not saying necessarily that systems approaches will give an answer to all that, but that will be definitive, but they definitely give you an alternative, and in my experience they give you an alternative that works better. It's not that systems is always better than conventional approaches, it isn't. But you've made me lose my thread now. It isn't always. You do need both. But where the conventional stuff is failing, that for me is always a default and usually will give an answer. That's me done.
Patrick, thank you very much. Ben, you have an extra 10 seconds.
Yes, I'll use that. Well, I'll start there with a very quick disclaimer. Well, two disclaimers. First of all, there are many others more qualified in the room, not to say on the panel, than I am. I think I've abused my privileges to be on the panel today as the chair of the committee. But I am quite passionate about this as well. In fact, I count myself a relatively shoddy systems thinker, just as I'm a relatively shoddy consultant.
But he has had a haircut since the last event, ladies and
You may not believe it, but that is true.
It was in your honour as well.
The other is that for some people who came to the SCiO day today, it might be like the occasion when I flew on Turkish Airlines, checked in at the desk, and they said you have to take your excess baggage over there, and then this alley popped up behind the desk with the excess baggage, and then when they were checking tickets at the gate, it was Ali again, and I was very relieved to hear when the pilot came on he had a different name. The dearth of systems thinking in management consultancy really does appear to be heavily over-determined for me. But yet the use of these approaches, these ways of looking at the world, is both desirable and feasible and can actually be effective. So the question is, what's going on? So I thought what I would do is I would sort of itemise some of the sufficient determinants of why it's not fundamental and widespread, and I believe it isn't. And then attempt to sidestep them with another possibility and at least seed the debate. I may not get through all my reasons in the time allowed. I mean, the first one is the marketing challenge and the concept of this being a new idea. It isn't new, of course. Systems thinking has been around since at least the 1920s in various forms, and deeply before that if you look at Aristotle and various other people. But what you get is that early adopter, bridging the chasm challenge. Patrick talks about this very often on the board at SCiO. One aspect of that is that the people who carry the light through the wilderness and are the early adopters, it becomes very ingrained with their identity rather than a tool which they can easily use and easily offer to others. So it becomes something very special when it may not necessarily be that. The second, though, to counteract that, is capability. I do believe, and I've come to reluctantly believe this over the course of my lifetime, that people have different levels of capability of thinking. And actually, we overlook that at our peril. And people operating from one particular paradigm will just be absolutely nonplussed and not understanding, may feel threatened, but may feel that you're just talking out of your whatever, if you start to talk from a different thinking paradigm, a different perspective fundamentally. Then there are the small matter of incentives in consultancy organisations and the way in which we are structured and driven to do our work, particularly in big consultancies, but small consultancies tend to ape that very efficiently. Then there are the terrible and very didactic, very narrow, very programmatic procurement methods which are used not only in the public sector, which I suffer from enormously, having recently lost a bid without a pitch by 0.52% of the score.
Bitter.
Not that I'm bitter. Then there's the push to create a selling methodology, something replicable, ideally something that can be delivered by the juniors straight out of business school from a check sheet. Then there's the nature of systems thinking itself, which is emergent in itself, which creates more questions perhaps often than it creates answers, which tends to look beyond what people are positing as the problem or as the scope, and which tends to threaten to or offer the opportunity to change the paradigm of thinking about the organisation itself, which is deeply innovative and therefore deeply threatening and deeply disturbing, particularly for big organisations. And all of what I've just gone through is replicated on the client side as well as on the consultancy side. So we've got a kind of double whammy. And then there's the reaction, the emotional reaction of the consultants themselves, who are trying to bring in these new ideas and this new thinking, which we have to manage very carefully, because there is nothing worse than having the best thing ever and knowing that you can change the world, and actually feeling that people are not ready in some bizarre and unaccountable way. So the paradigmatic blindness goes both ways, unfortunately, particularly newly minted people who have some form of systems insight or an approach or a methodology that they want to use simply cannot understand why the world has not suddenly changed with them, and I myself have experienced this really interesting dynamic. So why then is it possible? Fortunately, I've nearly run out of time. I think we each in our own way, and a lot of people around the room, we've attracted almost exactly the wrong audience for this session. A lot of people who are capable and able and are interested and are probably applying these ideas.
Which is why the questions are going to be good.
Which is why the questions will be good and difficult. Fundamentally, I think that what can be offered is a better explanatory paradigm. What do I mean by that? I mean bringing multiple perspectives, particularly conflicting perspectives, which can explain what was explained before in the old way of thinking and can explain more. Therefore can offer better options for survival and viability and thriving of organisations, and I think that that's something that consultants should be deeply concerned about.
Perfect.
Excellent. You've got 20 seconds left. That's
Well, I nicked 10 off there. I can tell a story in the meantime.
That's true. No, you're okay. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Benjamin. I would like to say, if anyone would like to tweet tonight's event, please use @WCoMC if you wish to reference the Worshipful Company of Management Consultants. Just there.
Wake up.
There we go. Does SCiO have a Twitter account?
Yeah. No, we don't believe in it.
Yes, no.
This newfangled little
Does SCiO have a Twitter account?
There was a rumour, wasn't there? I think
Okay. Maybe you should all go away and do some systems thinking and set one up later. But if you would like to tweet, I suggest we use the hashtag systems thinking for this evening.
You could use hashtag SCiO, SCiO as well.
And hashtag SCiO.
I'll do one now.
But without further ado, and my colleague and collaborator in not wearing a tie tonight, Angus, on my far left. Angus, would you like to have your 6 minutes, please?
Thank you. And I'm very grateful to Benjamin for his last remarks about paradigm shift, and it's going to be important for the 21st century, because I'm certainly in this business because, as far as I'm concerned, the capabilities of management that were sufficient to bring us to the world that we have today are not going to be sufficient to solve the problems of today. And I'm pretty sure that the people in this room are the sort of people who would not need me to tell you what the problems of today are. I think my guess is that when I say that the front row, interestingly, is almost blank, we have Alan Meakin boldly going forth where no one else is willing to go. Well, is this the first time you have ever seen the situation that the front row is empty? I think you've seen it many times. Why does this pattern appear again and again and again? If it was an innocent matter, that would be fine. But if, on the other hand, when we dived into it, we were to understand that the reason why the front row all over the place is empty is because people's experience of education was so dreadful that they wanted to get to the back of the room, that would be a worrying discovery.
Hello at the back.
So this is an example of a pattern, and it's a broad, widely dispersed sociological pattern. What's behind it? That's a systems question. You probably all are familiar with the well-known joke about the man who walked one night, late at night, on a dark night, and came across a drunk underneath a lamppost who had lost his watch. "What are you doing?" said the man. "I'm trying to find my watch," said the drunk. "Did you lose it round here?" "No, I lost it over there." "Why aren't you looking over there then?" "Because there's no light over there." Well, it's an old joke, and it's probably been told better. But the point is that if we grab this story and turn it round, the man is looking with the frame, with the lens, with the light, with the way of looking that he's got, the drunk. And he's never going to find the solution with that way of looking, because it doesn't have enough, what we call requisite variety. It's not taking into account the actual reality of where the watch actually is. There are many modes of systems thinking, and they can be applied for different kinds of problem. But given the kind of problem that you've got, you need to have a mode of thinking that's capable, a mode of working that's capable with dealing with that level of problem. And I would suggest the problems of today are huge. I've been working a lot with IBM, and research that they've done shows vast numbers of very senior executives declaring that they find their work baffling. The problems are just too big, organizations are too huge, the issues of competition are too substantial, they cannot achieve what they want to do. And if I can be... Did you just tap?
No.
I clicked, I apologise.
22 seconds from the tap.
Great. So if I can be a bit personal. About 15 years ago, there was a chair founded to solve the problem that marketers had. And the problem that they had is that they were trying to become what they called integrated. Now, integrated from a customer point of view means that when they experience the organization across all the different range of channels and media and products and services, that they should somehow add up to being a coherent single experience of a brand with diversity. So they set up a chair and they fingered me to become the professor. And the first problem I had was to actually define what is the problem. What is integrated marketing? Where does it start? And what you see is that the conception of the problem was it was a range of communications that you did with ad agencies. But what about all the things that didn't involve ad agencies? What about all the real experiences, like in a call center? So then you suddenly realize the problem is actually the organization. And how does the organization get past being divided into its silos? That means organizing the organization to be able to become coherent. And yet most of the time it doesn't. And why not? Because when you look at the management training that people have had and the models that they've been using to do it, it tends to produce all kinds of silos across the organization. So the organization is fundamentally fragmented. To come to the conclusion, some years later I was working with a large technology business employing over 400,000 people, and we were trying to figure out how we could design an intervention that would be low cost, easy to do, and would scale to 400,000 people. Effortlessly, easily, and at almost zero cost. This is the kind of thing that you can do with the right kind of systems or cybernetic approach.